Do you ever wonder what would happen if voice casting changed? You know, for example, James Earl Jones's voice in Star Wars as Darth Vader. It's pretty iconic, right?
Sure.
At the same time, Frank Oz as Yoda, equally iconic. I think it's two characters defined by their voices.
Close, but I mean, okay, I'm not going to sit here and do a ranking of Vader and Yoda, but go on.
But so my question is, what do you think would have happened if they cast Frank Oz as Vader and James Earl Jones as Yoda?
We might not be doing the podcast we're about to do if that had been the case, to be perfectly frank.
I mean,
Oz.
Look, Vader gets on that spaceship at the beginning of the Star Wars and he chokes that guy out and he says, the plans, where are I'm not doing a Yoda voice.
Are you sure?
But he says the plans, where are they? It works. It would be weird. It's an alien voice.
They might have been better off sticking with David Prowse's acting if that were the case.
Look, one of my favorite Star Wars bonuses of all time is when it's the guy who played Chewbacca,
Peter Mayhew.
Peter Mayhew. He has a really thick kind of Cockney English accent. And when he's on top of the Millennium Falcon in Empire Strikes Back fixing it, and he's yelling at Han Solo, like Chewbacca's yelling at Han Solo, waving his hands in the air. He's obviously very upset. And there's an outtake of Peter Mayhew yelling in English in his Cockney accent at Harrison Ford. And it's fabulous.
I don't think I realized he acted verbally as well. Like Prowse, famously, David Prowse did the Vader lines and then was very upset when he found out they were dubbing him with James Earl Jones. I didn't realize that Mayhew did the Chewbacca lines in English. What?
I don't know if he did all the Chewbacca lines in English, but this is definitely one that I've heard. And it let me tell you, Peter Mayhew, wonderful, delightful human being, it seems like. But if he had done the voice for Chewbacca, it would have been a completely different movie too.
Where the hell have you been? All right, don't lose your temper. I'll come right back and give you a hand. Where you going? To make my report. Tell him we're leaving then. All right, I'll tell him.
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
Brad, I'm really, really excited about our guest today and the show we're doing today.
This has been a long time coming, long in the works.
It's a little different. It's a little different than what we usually do. But folks may know our guest this week from his work on Waypoint Remap Radio or Shift F1. And we could have chosen to talk to him about any number of fascinating topics, from race cars to home audio to coffee. But today we're going to dig deep into his work on A More Civilized Age, a Star Wars podcast, to try and figure out exactly what, if any, rules technology follows in the ever-expanding world of Star Wars. Without further ado, welcome to the show, Rob Zacny. We're so glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to have another place to talk about Star Wars. I don't have enough.
I was going to say, when I asked you to do this, I was a little chagrined because I was like, Rob talks about Star Wars a lot, and maybe he's good, but no. AMC is one of my favorite podcasts, and it's fun to have you here.
And this is also the fulfillment of a years-long dream, right? If they could get Rob Zacny on the Tech Pod is like possibly the number one most requested guest. So I apologize that the excuse we came up with is the thing you do all the time anyway.
Yeah, next time we'll bring you on to talk about coffee or race cars or something else. But
something totally fresh.
Yeah, so the setup for this, I think, is that we want to figure out the rules of tech in Star Wars, right? Because there's definitely rules. Somewhere along the way, the people who write Star Wars and Pablo Hidalgo and all the people that are responsible for the lore have clearly thought about this. But I have questions. And I think, Rob, you're going to be our expert today. So
I have theories.
Okay. And so there's two kind of ways to look at this, right? Like, is this like the writer's rules, or is this the rules of how it actually works for the characters in the world? And I think both are equally interesting, so we can do whatever we want or both. We have a big long list of stuff that we want to talk about, but there's also some weird stuff that we can just jump right into. Like, Why? There's no paper. They don't have paper. How do you get a spacefaring civilization with no paper? That seems pretty unlikely to me. They have trees. We've definitely seen trees. Like,
you literally never see paper.
I don't think I've ever seen paper in Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely like a long running trope of Star Wars fandom is like there's no paper. Like you never see anything get written down. Like what's up with that?
Because I know in some of the like in the books, of course, people talk about like it's on piece of flimsy and such. But I think that even those might be like older EU books. But I'm trying to think, do they really fully commit to the notion that nobody puts anything on parchment?
Well, okay, so there's the books in The Last Jedi that are the old Jedi books that Luke has saved and preserved. But then like when you go into the Jedi archives in the prequels and Clone Wars and all that stuff, it looks like it's all just like clear pieces of plexiglass with stuff on them that look like Star Trek pads. So I don't think they have paper except for
they were full. They digitized
stuff.
their records. Like the Jedi Order absolutely would have been the sort of people who are like, we don't need to keep physical media anymore. We have these data pads. We can just digitize our archives.
We have holographic cubes now.
It's not like we'd lose a planet that way or something, right? It's probably fine. Okay, so but like they don't have a way to pass a note. How kids can't pass notes in class? Like there's no way for young people to. There's no way for. How does a spy get the information? Well, we know how spies get information out. They carry a giant USB thumb drive up a huge tower, and then they have to beam it up to a spaceship, which is, the plot demanded, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think if you look closely too, you don't get a strong sense of the like ergonomics or design of the data pads people are using. Like there's very little convincing about when you see people interacting with something that they're supposedly reading or writing stuff down on. The times you see people using these things, I think it's more difficult now because we've all internalized like the logic of like what a smartphone is going to do and how that's going to function. But when you see people messing around with something as if it is some sort of writing implement or record keeping device, you don't get a strong sense like you're not really doing anything. We know that prop isn't going to get that job done.
It's like the kid on Galaxy Quest who played the helmsman who had a specific set of controls that he did every time. Well, I mean, this is one of the things that divides the prequels and the original movies, right? Because the original movies, like they didn't have this kind of analog. They didn't have a smartphone or tablet analog, really, I don't think. But in the prequels, they definitely picked up on, hey, computers existed more in the prequels than they did in the original movies from the 70s.
A bit. I think so. Like my main theory, like one of my main theories about Star Wars is that when they started out, they're kind of imagining it. Well, it's going to be sort of futuristic and it's going to feel very sci-fi. And then, but the thing is, the movie is made at this moment where technology is also advancing really, really quickly. And in some ways, you're already past the point where like the things that Star Wars is into are the technological solutions that existed in the world of like 1975, 1985. Those things were already past where we see them in Star Wars. And I think computing itself is one of them. When we see, it seems like Star Wars really starts to pin down what's possible with computers. I think the moment where you see the ISB in Andor had like the ability to do an archive search, the ability to go into like their surveillance state LexisNexis and enter a search term is like booking time on a Cray machine in like 1960. It is an extremely finite resource, and the ability to sift information, even that crudely, is really, really like closely guarded and kept in the Empire, in the world of Andor, which means that droids don't function as like the analog to, they're doing something else with droids. Droids are there increasingly as like computing technology can't really do very much at all. Computing technology is like racking its brain to do a terms search through data. Droids can reason, can reason, can talk, learn new skills, do all sorts of stuff, and are advanced intelligences. but they don't have them doing just computer stuff. They don't appear to be able to have them do computer stuff. A droid fulfills its task as a little guy who does a job.
Well, yeah, they're like mechanical experts, right? So they're like they either like 3PO is a translator, R2D2 lets the X-Wing go to hyperspace. The little mouse droids on the Death Star go around and go woo, and then get stomped on or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they may not be walking computers, but they do know how to talk to computers at least.
Well, that's a whole other thing. Yeah. I think the idea that like it's funny, you were talking about the mainframes in the old 60s computers, and I thought about there's an episode of Mad Men where they buy an IBM mainframe computer so that they can do computer stuff at the ad agency. And when they get down to it, everybody's like, "Hey, what are we buying this computer for?" We're like, "Well, we got to have a computer. I don't know what we use the computer for. But yeah, everybody else has a computer, so we got to get a computer too." And it's definitely like in Star Wars, it's definitely not that. They know what the computer, like they use computers for things. But I mean, maybe this is why Star Wars isn't science fiction, right? Star Wars takes place in space and there's spaceships and you fly from place to place. But it's not, at the end of the day, it's not, you're not talking to the library computer on the Enterprise. You're having this, the computer is always a thing that just moves the plot along, I guess. I don't know. I haven't thought about this at all. This is a part of this I haven't considered really.
Yeah, I think the thing that for me, so much of Star Wars technology comes down to, for me, just my point of entry into Star Wars, where I'm most interested as a young fan, certainly was, I like the starfighters. Like I logged so much stick time in X-Wing, TIE Fighter, X-Wing versus TIE Fighter. That entire series, I knew way too much about starfighters in Star Wars. I had the technical manuals. Like, well, actually, this ship has a complement of 14,000 people. I knew absurd amounts about that shit.
I'm sorry. Can I just jump in really quick and tell you that I once absolutely destroyed Patrick Klepek's mind at bar trivia by busting out the phrase T-16 Skyhopper?
Absolutely.
like almost threw his beer at me kind of situation. Anyway,
wow.
Go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the thing is, like, for you, that's not even like a deep cut, right?
No,
It's
really?
Of course that's Luke's, that's the Lars family, aircraft
wagon. Yeah.
Right.
But so the thing is, those games are all sort of following Lucas's lead in that we have to maintain the technology level roughly at the level of like World War II dogfighting, and really in a lot of ways more World War I. Like if you look at what was possible at the end of World War II with like air-to-air combat, Star Wars is pre even that. There's sort of this during World War II, they introduced radar-directed fire control for anti-aircraft guns, and there's this great book. James Hornfisher. It's about the naval battles off Guadalcanal. The name escapes me at the moment, but there's this moment in the book where like a Japanese torpedo bomber squadron that's like, it had its way through the Pacific Theater for years, encounters for the first time radar directed gunfire. And it's a massacre. That there's a certain assumption about like, incoming anti-aircraft fire. It's going to be inaccurate. There's a lot of guesswork, especially during a night attack. They hit this wall of flak and immediately like these guys who survived like years of intensive combat operations, like in eye blink, all dead. A couple guys make it out. They have no idea what they hit. That technology is like that shows up in like 1942 in World War II. And from the moment it is introduced, you no longer have people like physically sighting a gun on a target. You start having the radar kicks over to the fire control computer, and faster than we can process it, the correct fuses are set to the munitions, and it's over. And things advance very, very quickly after that. And that stuff doesn't exist in Star Wars. Star Wars doesn't even want that much. It implies things like the targeting computer, Luke's janky, piece of crap that never successfully puts a proton torpedo on a thermal exhaust port. But in general, like Star Wars wants it to be like World War I, where you have to close within, like 100 yards of another target and like physically sight the gun and shoot them. And all its technology, I think, is kind of sort of worked around the need to prevent anything in that world from enabling you to do anything beyond that. That it is going to great pains to avoid what you see in a lot of hard sci-fi, which is sort of recognition of, well, if military technology is here in 1950, 1960, it'd be pretty wild by, the year 3000.
When we put Skynet on the murder robots, turns out the murder robots are really efficient at killing people. Like you never had that imbalance either at all, right? Like even the Empire, which is this enormous juggernaut, doesn't have like even with it's still a fair fight. It's always a fair fight. Yeah, Star Wars.
You talk about not landing a torpedo at the end of the first movie, but like you see the exact same thing conversely from the Empire's end, right? Because all the turrets on the Death Star are unable to pick off these like relatively out of date, scrappy fighters that they've had to scrounge from wherever they could get them, right? Like Will, you said at the top of the episode, like there are rules in this universe, but like to me, it really has always felt like there's actually one rule, which is just make everything as exciting as possible all the time. And like kind of Rob's point is that anything that would make something less exciting, for example, a dude sitting at a terminal pressing some buttons and just picking things off invisibly without having to aim at them and miss them constantly, like that's just not going to fly in the setting, right?
I don't know. I feel like the different eras handle this stuff really differently too. Like I feel like the prequels are much more kind of grounded in reality, like in a shared reality. Because you have to remember, by that point they'd been working in these multiple layers of canon for years. And while I think George probably didn't care much about any of that stuff outside of that his word was law, the rest of it, like I think it still seeped over enough so that he was more consistent with what he did in those early movies than other stuff. But then there's like huge gaps, like seemingly prenatal care is a real problem in the world of Star Wars, right? They're bad at that, we guess.
Well, maybe if you're trying to hide your pregnancy from the world, maybe you don't go in for all the routine checkups.
I think it gets a bad rap. I think there's two things. Yes, I think there's a couple things. She goes to, there's no like routine OBGYN appointments because they're hiding everything from the Jedi Council. They can't. There's no prenatal care. He does strangle her.
Just a little.
Like that does happen. It's not like they just fumbled it in the delivery room. She came in with like pretty massive physical trauma.
Yeah, okay.
And then it didn't go well.
Fair.
What was the Uba Booba droid supposed to do with that?
I mean, look, if they can take 98% Burns body, they like do some Bacta injections or something. I don't know what the fix is for that, but it seems like sometimes the medicine's magic, and sometimes you get a little bit of a force choke and you just go right down.
It is true. Like I wish it would have been nice to see them at least try, like with some Bacta or something. Just like whip her into a vat of Bacta, and maybe it works.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt by trying. You don't get hurt by trying. It's not going to make it worse, right?
Water births are a thing too, right? Like,
it's very popular.
It would just be like that.
I mean, well, if we're really going to go down this road, this is not really the technology of Star Wars, but she didn't so much die medically as she died thematically, right? I mean, it's the whole like, grand mythology, died of a broken heart type thing, if we really want to get into that angle, right?
I went back and watched it this morning just to because I hadn't seen it in a long time and I'd forgotten. But yeah, the robot says she's just lost the will to live, man. There's nothing I can do with that. It's all over. There was no throat trauma there causing the problem. It was just sad. So medical technology, like this is the Jim Cameron rule where like she died because the plot demanded, right? That's the at the end of this day, she had to die because Luke and Leia didn't have a mom.
Or if you really want to get into it, maybe like she died because freedom and democracy had also died.
I mean, look, she was a little soft on that stuff, but I don't think you've watched Clone Wars, have you, Brad?
I have not.
Okay, so
I have not seen the final season of Clone Wars.
The post season, the 7th season, like the one that they did after the Disney purchase. Okay,
right. You're right. She is not. She has more in common with like democratic leadership in today's world than you might want to see from a hero.
Look, she believes in the Republic a lot, but not so much that she's willing to go any way out of her way or up at any kind of status quo. That's pretty well established, I think, in the canon. Okay, so there are people in Star Wars literate? Just generally speaking, does Han Solo know how to read?
So There's Orabesh written everywhere.
Okay.
But for the most part, that's like signage, things like that. Not necessarily. I don't know that you ever see anyone like. I mean, obviously, it's too cool to just sit down and read a book.
Well, they don't have books. What are you going to make a book out? Yeah.
No, the Star Wars Kindle, like pulling out their little plexiglass data pad thing and like reading, reading good yarn. That's not him. His life of the mind is the Jarg table. In the common room of the Falcon.
He'd rather be playing Sabacc. But I mean, I guess does Luke know how to read? I don't know. I assume that the poor people don't know how to read. Because why? Like, there's no public schools on Tatooine. Seems like.
Well, see, now I have to think here. Okay, so in the Clone Wars, we see like Mandalore has schools. Kids are going to classrooms.
Well, they're enlightened. This is why they're independent.
That is true.
Yeah.
Then they do poison those kids.
That was an accident, though. It was a light poisoning.
Accident.
Yeah, their finger slipped.
That is a good question. Like, to what degree does literacy exist in this world? Now, if you go to the old EU, we just read the Timothy Zahn books.
Classics.
That is an extensively literate world. People are constantly reading books on their personal data pads. Basically, like their personal data pads are our tablets, our phones. That is in the world of Zahn. This was true of a lot of the old EU in the novels. People were reading stuff, and it makes sense because in a novel, it's really efficient. Instead of having an expository sequence, someone just pulls up a file and reads it in the book, and you see this sort of block quote of the file. There's a moment where Luke is trying to learn about Jedi Master Joruus Sabaoth, and he starts searching the Coruscant archives, and like you just get the search results he gets as he looks up this guy's life, and it's being kicked out by the computer. Leia's reading novels while she's sort of waiting to have her kids in that series. Like, people are reading all the time, but none of that is canon anymore. And I don't know currently what the overall state of literacy is. Because, like Luke does burn those books, but maybe he burned them because he resented them. Because as a poor Tatooine farm boy, the knowledge that was locked away there,
it was trapped.
He couldn't access it.
Well, okay, so like at one point, one of the characters finds has a gun that's like stashed into a carved out book, like an Ian Fleming novel, basically, right?
Yeah.
So books are there.
Interestingly enough, it's not a book. So this is Mara Jade finding a pistol hidden in a library in the guest quarters. Where we have books, where we would have a hardcover edition, they have little boxes that would be full of the data cards where the books reside. So it would be like you had your hardcover copy of Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy, your omnibus edition, and you go and you pull that off the shelf and you flip that open, and there'd be like a half dozen data cards with a segment of the novels on it.
It's your Blu-ray steelbook, right?
What a nightmare world! Good God,
that sounds terrible. Sounds like the worst.
But they can't transmit data. Like, again, they struggle mightily with data transmission.
Yeah, like all the way through, like all eras, it's the same. Because like the getting the thing into R2, like Princess Leia has to jam a thing inside R2D2. It's the first thing we see in the movie, pretty much. The Rogue One upload from into to Princess Leia, I guess, is like it's a enormous affair that ends with people literally climbing a ladder and jamming a thing into a hole next to a satellite dish.
To get like a 14.4 modem fired up.
Yeah. The world's worst Dropbox link.
What's weird is this is kind of weirdly consistent in Star Wars. Do you notice how I want to say this is A New Hope, the Rebel radio chatter is compressed to shit. When you hear it on the base, it's buzzing, it's crackling. You can barely recognize like the human speech underneath it. And like canonically, one of the things was they have to compress their transmissions really intensively to make their comms work.
This tension is something I have always just gone out of my way not to interrogate in this universe, because like is there a name for like the blue flickery hologram transmission thing that is so iconic? You know what I'm talking about, whatever it's called.
Yeah, it's like just holocoms, but yeah.
Right. Like by the same token with the voice comms you're talking about, like, why does that look like shit? Because it's cool, right? Like, this is a civilization that has sapient robotic life and has apparently completely defeated the force of gravity. But like you said, like can't transmit like a trivial amount of 20th century data through the air. Like I like, do you make anything of that tension or that conflict or that kind of nonsensical quality to the setting beyond George Lucas thought things looked cool and so he went with it?
Sort of. I think in a weird way, it makes a degree of sense if you think about where we invent the transistor and the semiconductor in our world. They get a magical solution to a lot of that stuff that technology is going to be used for in the form of droids. And fundamentally, they don't have, at least for most technology, those rather foundational building blocks of technology. Now, when we see droids and such, it does appear they have like circuit boards and all that, but it does seem like whenever you're talking about like a computer that is not a droid that people are using, it might as well be running on like vacuum tubes and such. It might as well be, operating like highly mechanically. Interestingly enough, there's a thing where, again, in the Zahn trilogy, there's this point where they're trying to find like a particular sort of scanner. What they need is a crystal grav field trap. And the implication is these things are huge and they're rare. And what they need the crystal for is to produce a sort of search wave to find cloaked asteroids above Coruscant. But my interpretation has always been in the same way that like radio crystals were like an important key piece of technology before the transistor. In Zahn's world, I don't know if this is still the case, but I think it's sort of implied, because I've always suspected Zahn is sort of thinking through the same stuff. The transistor obviates the need to continue having like crystal radio sets. But that stuff is used through World War II. It's sort of a late development that you get the transistor. We did a lot without transistors. And I think a similar thing is happening in Star Wars, where a lot of their communications technology, if you imagine like how it's working, it's not a little circuit board that is powering this. In a lot of cases, it is like massive analog tuners and like natural resources.
I mean, it's interesting because it seems like the way I always thought about it is, it seems like the world of Star Wars cracked power generation in a way that we've struggled with for the last 150 years. But like it seems like it's a world of infinite power, like everything from the droids to the Star Destroyers hovering above, inside the atmosphere, to, going faster than the speed of light to travel between planets, solar systems. All of those things require just ridiculous amounts of power on different scales that, like, frankly, we're not capable of. If you look at like what a battery pack on a human scale robot looks like for us today, they're good for like 45 minutes. And, they're a terrifying amount of chemical energy jammed in there. That's just like a walking bomb with a robot attached to it, basically. So maybe cracking that opened up the door for a bunch of other, for things that would be wildly inefficient if you didn't have that power source, if you didn't have the high power source.
I'm trying to think what they imply as the fuel source for a lot of this.
So like you don't ever see anybody recharge a lightsaber, right? Or a blaster, even, really,
or a droid for that. Like
no. Blasters, they have power packs.
Yeah, but do you ever? It's not like Han Solo gets onto the Millennium Falcon and drops his DL-44 into the charging pack or swaps out the pack ever. You never see it, right?
No.
It's not something you have to do that often.
Or for that matter, do you ever see a droid? I mean, yeah, I guess there's like the C-3PO, like, I'll power down for a while if you don't need me, but beyond that, like, you never see like a droid go home to its docking station like a walking Roomba.
So in the novelization of Empire Strikes Back, which is all I read, like I'm of the age that Empire Strikes Back was unavailable to me between the time I saw Star Wars on TV and Return of the Jedi in theaters. So I read the novelization because I was like, I don't know what happens next. In the novelization of Empire Strikes Back, that little lantern thing that Luke is playing with when he sets down on Dagobah is also charging up R2-D2 when he plugs him in. So
that's a deep
if I remember right. Yeah. Look, that one stuck with me. This is like knowledge from age 7, 40 years ago. So, but yeah, like they don't, I feel like in some of the EU books, probably they talked about charging stuff, but like they talk about power cells and things like that for Luke's robot hand and things like that. And then in Solo, they talk about the fuel source for the spaceships a lot. But then from then we kind of don't get anything until The Last Jedi, when suddenly the Resistance fleet is running out of gas and the Empire is going to come, the First Order is going to come get them. And they have fuel management issues in there. Look, the rebellion's never been great at logistics. So that is definitely a thing that we know. But yeah, so I feel like there's like magic power generation for the whole thing, right up until the point that like J.J. Abrams comes along and Rian Johnson, I guess we'll pin this one on Rian Johnson, but yeah, and then it's a problem
a bit. Yeah. In the Clone Wars, now I think of it, there's a lot of like, we just finished a season of the Clone Wars. Might have happened more in season 2. We just finished season 3, where there's a lot of stuff where they are going out and doing raids to acquire fuel sources. They are like hoovering up like gases in deep space and then compressing those to power ships. There's a moment where the Ghost is sort of serving as or is intended to serve as a sort of fueling rendezvous ship for Mon Mothma's ship as she escapes Coruscant, and it's got like huge external fuel tanks on it. And yeah, when they imply what they imply what the rebels are running on, and that is extensively like refined gas. What I don't know if that is true of everything the Empire runs. Something that Star Wars, the nature of like the lightsaber, it's sort of running forever on power through these, again, crystals. We see that taken in Rogue One as, well, what could possibly power the Death Star? Crystals. We're gonna do that. And so there's kind of an implication again in throughout Star Wars that I don't think at any point they're really saying, activate the fusion drive. They don't got the fusion drive, but they do have various like natural resources that are like basically magic, fairly consequence free, at least to use it, like sources of power. So if you just slap enough kyber crystals in a thing, you've got either infinite energy or one good shot to destroy a planet. Similar with like, you just like, slurp up enough nebula gas and sort of compress it, you can sort of run your ship off it, like the CO2 race car in shop class or something like that.
Nebulas are oddly explosive, and it's Rebels. I think you said Clone Wars, but you all are on Rebels now, right?
Yeah.
Nebulas are oddly explosive sometimes in the cartoons, especially. I've noticed. I think that's really fun.
Yeah, we just had them like they shot the nebula, and it was like in the Bourne Identity where he just fills that apartment with gas and just like has the guy get killed with the explosion. Yeah, they take some liberties with just like a bunch of highly flammable gas that's just hanging out in space, and if anything touches it, it'll just go.
I mean, yeah, that's fun. # fun there.
It's a hell of a shot.
Yeah.
You mentioned kyber crystals.
Yeah.
What is a lightsaber? What is coming out of there?
Well,
this is a complicated one, right? Because it's changed over the years.
Has it? I don't know. I mean, has there ever actually been like, first of all, I don't want to say like, there's a canonical answer for this, because like, who cares? I mean, I'm curious to hear like what the ideas are behind it that have been floated over time,
Yeah, I'm trying to I'm thinking back. I feel like early on, maybe this goes back to the novelizations. What I remember was they are beams of pure energy that do not emit waste heat. That's one key thing. Like, it's a perfectly coherent beam of energy.
Okay.
That like doesn't heat what it's cutting. It just like, again, slices through pretty cleanly. It doesn't except to the point of contact. There's no waste energy. And I mean, you'd almost think of it as like a single, like, the theoretical line of energy coming off it. And everything we see as the lightsaber is just like emitted light. Like
a 2-dimensional line. Like it's only one, it's 0 units thick and X units long.
Yes.
Okay.
But they also don't emit visible light until they do, right? Like until until the onset technology. Until the onset technology catches up, and now they're able to actually embed a light in the prop. Right, because they emitted no actual light. They
used reflective. I think the original, like they used a mix of it was obviously post, but I think they used some reflective blades as well for some of the shots.
Yeah, I think is it Attack of the Clones was the first movie where suddenly they had a lightsaber fight in the dark, and now it's cool to make the lightsabers actually emit light on their surroundings.
Yeah,
for the first time.
And then obviously it goes a little bit haywire with Obi-Wan. And how they shoot that, but there's always been weird things about the lightsaber too, which is that if you think about it as it's a thing of pure energy but no mass. If you've ever done like any sort of just imagine a tool that has no weight, right? Like I was a fencer, right? The idea of using some sort of bladed weapon that has no balance, that has no weight except at the hilt is bonkers. Like it would be so alien and unnatural as to verge on being unusable. And I think maybe that is where some of the Jedi of the Jedi-ness comes in. This is why it's the weapon of the Jedi. The reason, because why can't anyone just like grab a laser sword? Anyone can, Han uses it to slice open the tauntaun. Why wouldn't tons of people be out there being like, the equivalent of like the Maul ninja with the lightsaber? But I think kind of the answer there is the weirdness of the lightsaber itself means that most people would not want to wield that in combat because it doesn't feel remotely like any of the things that make a tool or weapon something you can sort of sense and manipulate easily. But the Jedi feels that coherent beam of energy perfectly and wields it as an extension of themselves.
I mean, I think you could make an argument that it'd be really good for like a self-searing tuna knife or something, like in the kitchen. It'd be really handy. You get out there and you can cook the fish as you're cutting. You can, whatever. It makes the whole thing a lot easier. So there's probably monetization opportunities in the Star Wars universe for like lightsaber cutlery, laser sword cutlery. Sorry.
Like just the finest sashimi you've ever encountered.
Yeah, but I think it feels like, I wonder, like, it does feel like it has mass, though. I wonder if this is a practical consideration that came in the later movies when they had a young person fighting with lightsabers instead of Alec Guinness and, David Prowse, who neither were particularly spry in the first movie. And it was very much it was like 30 style boxing of lightsaber fighting in the two old guys going at each other kind of way.
One idea that I've seen attached to this, which I think is pure like fan crafting, so give it as much weight as you want, is the idea that there might be some like gyroscopic effects associated with wielding one of these things. That there would be some kind of an unpredictable quality to swinging it around because it would have a bit of a mind of its own. That kind of, to your point, could really only be mastered by a Jedi or somebody who could kind of like integrate it into their being and sort of sense what it's going to do before it does it.
That makes a degree of sense, especially again because of just like the weapon's sort of bizarre balance would sort of consistently throw you off, and it would feel like there's kind of an odd counterweighting effect there at the bottom. But yeah, like there's moments. The point about the weapon having mass, I think one of the shot that immediately comes to mind is when Luke goes berserk on Vader. And he starts like, both hands over his head and just starts beating the shit out of him. At that point, that lightsaber sure looks like it has about the characteristics of like a Louisville slugger, right? It begins to look like something that has weight that he has to really sort of heft over his head. That there is a object with a lot of mass and inertia that he is having to wield, and that is probably just. Again, it's going to look for the filmmaking standpoint. That's kind of what you want Luke to be communicating at that moment. You can't have like Luke going, going ham on Vader, and it's like he's whacking him with a feather duster. That's not going to work.
He's beating him with a crop, right? I mean, and from a practical standpoint, the things that they're waving around and whacking each other with. Have they are weighty. The reflective sticks that they used in the original trilogy, especially, pretty sturdy by today's standard, but compared to the fighting props that they use today. So do we talk about lightsabers more? Are we feeling good?
Feeling great about lightsabers. I think they're goofy.
I was gonna say, so Brad, apologies, we're trying to avoid spoilers here, but in The Mandalorian, there's a special lightsaber that comes up, and it's a heavy beefy lightsaber for reasons that are unclear to me.
Very selectively.
Yeah, extremely. One guy, no problem at all. One woman, no problem at all. One guy just not able to cope with it, it turns out. I don't know that matters. Maybe it's an old busted lightsaber. It is old, I guess, in the canon.
Is this the dark saber? I have not seen the Mandalorian, but you can come out and say it.
Yeah, this is the dark saber. It's a special lightsaber.
This thing makes me angry. Like, okay. It makes me angry because it's okay. So somebody decided to put a katana in Star Wars.
Okay,
katanas already basically exist. They're lightsabers themselves, but damn it, we need a katana. So the Mandalorians have their old beef with the Jedi, and then there's this special Mandalorian lightsaber, the dark saber, and it's a katana with a blade of like a black light blade. It
looks pretty cool. In fairness,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I have to admit the immediate vibe I got from the term darksaber was the old like edgelord gray Jedi thing of like, well, I'm a good guy who's a good Jedi, but I also get to shoot lightning out of my fingers because I'm edgy at the same time.
Look, I assume that the Mandalorian Jedi skirted a little close to the scary parts of the Force. He would choke somebody out occasionally if he needed to. It's he put a couple points down in that negative in the dark tree.
But anyway, so whoever wields the dark saber, it's like the fated blade. You are the rightful king of all Mandalore, or queen, as the case may be. And the way it has to be won through combat, and the way it lets you know if you're not the chosen, if you're not the rightful wielder, is that it gets heavier and heavier in the hand. So it starts out it's a good sturdy lightsaber blade. It's fine. But if you are not entitled to wield it, it gets heavier and heavier, and you get slower and slower until the blade becomes like Mjolnir, like too heavy to move.
I missed this entirely.
So in Book of Boba Fett.
Right.
Is this why you missed it?
Probably.
Did you eject?
I watched the 2 episodes that were Mandalorian episodes and kind of bypassed the rest.
So he goes and he brings the lightsaber to his buddies, and he's like, "Hey, I found the lightsaber." And then the big Kryze guy, the big dude.
Oh, Pre Vizsla.
They fight. It's sort of a they test each other. Vizsla thinks he's still the rightful, he should be the rightful wielder of this, and it just gets heavier and heavier for him as he fights. And that's where they explain, like, see, you're not the chosen. You're not supposed to wield this. So this is just going to get heavier and heavier, and it's not going to work for you if you're not the chosen one. Major thing. This is okay. All right, that's the rule of how this thing works. Cool. Like for metaphysical reasons, this thing's going to become too heavy to wield if you are not entitled to wield it. But this thing first comes up in Rebels. This doesn't happen. Like, people are extensively
they hand it around left and right in Rebels, right?
Yeah, no problems, none whatsoever. It's still the fated blade. It's still like whoever wields this is like the rightful ruler of Mandalore. But it's like there is a symbol. No point. If you get your hands on that, you can cut someone with it. No problem.
Look, it's been 10 years since Rebels. Somebody had a good idea somewhere in between the two, and nobody watched the cartoons. Really, it's probably fine. Nobody's going to know.
So many people watch the cartoons.
I mean, the cartoon, like I've talked about this on the show before. The cartoons are low key the best part of Star Wars that's come out since the original trilogy. Like the good episodes of the Clone Wars and Rebels are up there with everything, with the best of the movies from the last 20 years. Easily. It's a low bar for the best of the movies for the last 20 bars. There's like maybe 2, 3, 2.5 good ones. But anyway, you want to talk about space travel? This is a weird thing. I mean, this is just plot. This is just straight up. Hey, sometimes it takes one amount of time. Does it take 3 days to get someplace? Does it take a month? Do you have to travel in a spaceship for hundreds of years? Who knows? Who could tell? Who could say how far things are apart?
Where does Luke go when he's in the X-Wing? How long is he crammed in the X-Wing getting to Dagobah? And what does he do en route?
So much.
Oh, no. Here we go.
It is such a testament to the greatness of Empire Strikes Back that I never noticed. And I saw the movie so many times. It never occurred to me that none of this made any sense. None of it. Like, they're cross-cutting between Luke going to Dagobah and beginning his Jedi training and an asteroid chase. Like, it's completely different timescales.
But how long? The training's what? Like, is the training like 6 months? Is the training a year? Are they traveling at sublight from the asteroid field to Bespin, and so they're just chilling in the Millennium Falcon for like a literal year? Or
I think it is implied. I think it is implied that like a day or two after their escape from Hoth, they're at Bespin. They're just gonna fly in sublight speeds. Don't worry. Look, relativity doesn't exist in Star Wars. Don't worry about that at all.
It's a smaller galaxy.
So they like literally smaller. There's a point where again, the Zahn trilogy, there's a great moment where Thrawn orders his ships to start like maneuvering around the system, like use that planet as cover and begin bringing the Star Destroyer. And it's like imagining like the people are like ducking behind a planet while planet, like it's like you're fighting a big Rari, I guess is the way I would put it. That's kind of their vision of how space works. And this is even Zahn sort of imagines the combat this way, where Star Destroyers are kind of like zipping out from behind planets, sort of like peeking like Counter-Strike shot. But so that means that like things are close together. Relativity does not exist. Sublight engines can get you to a different star system. No problem. There's going to be no interstellar, like, hundreds of years. None of that shit's going to happen. Can't have that. But I think the implication is, even with all those caveats, they are not aboard the Millennium Falcon for that long before like they arrive at Bespin. To me, it feels like a day or two later, after the harrowing escape to the asteroid field, they show up on Lando's door. Meanwhile, through the magic of editing, Luke appears to have been like training under the wizened master for like months.
Well, I mean, maybe they do have relativity, because if they were going close to the speed of light to Bespin, then the time's going to move very slowly for them, and it's going to move fast for Luke. Will be out in the real world for a long time. So maybe he was there for maybe they just went dark for like 2 years getting to Bespin. And meanwhile, there had to be a clock wipe in there somewhere.
They'll just happen to line up. But I want to get back to the question of him traveling to Dagobah in, again, an X-Wing that has less room to get up and move around than your average station wagon. I mean, there's no standing up in that thing, let alone going to a bathroom. So are we talking a matter of hours that took him to get there, or what?
He has powers. He is a Jedi trances of a variety or two.
I mean, yeah, honestly, if Anakin could keep himself alive for days after burning to death, I guess Luke could hold. I guess Luke could hold it for a little while.
You think he holds it?
I think the idea. What's that?
He ain't holding it.
Maybe he just lets it go.
It's like astronauts, diaper? Man. Like that's just. It's like it's got to be like still suits, right? It's just gonna be like no. Extreme
circumstances, dignity,
the survival gear. Yeah, no, I'm sure it's fine.
Well, not a concern.
They have toilets in Star Wars, right?
They have refreshers. Yes.
Yeah.
But the X-Wing does not.
I wish I didn't know that. Yes, the X-Wing does not.
So space diapers is what we're thinking.
Yeah, no, I think he's just gotta either hold it or like in enough duress. Like it's fine, whatever.
Sure.
But I do think, like he's a combat pilot. Like there's some like think about it's kind of a bad example because like Strategic Bomber Command, like the B-52s and the B-36, those did have onboard like restroom facilities.
Yeah,
but. Does the B-2 Spirit have a restroom?
Yeah,
because like I know that those things like have long missions, like those things like will launch and like will be in the air for 24 hours or so.
Yeah, it has a bed, toilet, and microwave oven because they do off crew on B-2s.
Oh, sure.
So does the B-1 because they're designed like they can do 36 like multiple like a day full day in the air or something ridiculous.
And you keep refueling them theoretically like much longer. But yeah.
I mean, anyway, back to the larger point of just like how long does hyperspace take to get you places? Like, I can't even qualify this, but I've gotten the sense over time that it's very, very much on the shorter end of the spectrum than the longer one. Like even a long journey is maybe a few hours, like minutes to hours, not days to weeks.
Yeah, I think this is one that changed with the because in the Zahn books, he likes timescales to unfold across weeks and months, and so you'll have people refer to this Imperial fleet will be in transit for the next 2 weeks, basically in hyperspace. But it does not appear that has ever been a thing that echoes what we see in the movies. Other weird thing, how's Death Star getting around? I've never liked this. I've never felt good about the answer to that either.
Giant hyperdrive.
Right. It shows up and it just sort of zips over to Yavin. But I don't know. It's kind of a goofy thing because we never get any sense of it having a propulsion system. It just kind of shows up in your system and then slowly shambles over into firing position.
It does just kind of zip around without any most of the ships we see have got some very visible means of propulsion, mostly giant afterburners and stuff because those look cool. But how does the Death Star move? There is no visible anything on there. It just kind of zips around.
I mean, my question with the Death Star is always where do you park that thing when you're not using it? Because if you're on a planet someplace and they're like, oh hey, Death Stars, it's not like Fleet Week when the Death Star shows up above your planet. You're not going out and watching the TIE Fighter Blue Angels come by and do their thing and fly under the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever. You're like, oh man, there's a giant planet killing death laser above me. I don't want that there.
I mean, it is a moon. You probably just put it in orbit around something, right?
I don't. I'm gonna NIMBY this one up. I don't want that in my backyard.
You think it would be it wouldn't be like Fleet Week, but the problem is in the Imperial core, it would be once the Death Star completed its mission, destroy the Rebel Alliance, people would be like, oh wow, look, the Death Star is here this week.
Look, you don't think it's not like they're doing tours. It's not like you hop on the Imperial shuttle and you and the kids go up and you get to see look, we're going to check. Look at this cool Imperial base. This is all, they don't let people out. There's no outreach for the Imperial Navy. They don't care. They don't have to do that. Is there young Stormtrooper League? No. I mean, maybe there is actually.
Well, that's they imply in various places that the stormtroopers that the Imperials do recruit for the fleet. There've been they play around with ideas of Star Wars propaganda posters and things like that. Notions that you can sort of bring people in. But then you do have the sequel trilogy embracing the idea that the First Order doesn't have access to that pipeline and just begins enslaving subject peoples and sort of kidnapping children, forcing them to serve in their stormtrooper corps. But I kind of think that the Empire would have been because the Empire's us, right? This is kind of Lucas does see it from the standpoint of the rebels of the Viet Cong, the NBA, and the Empire is America. And I think it is totally in keeping with sort of America's relationship with its own power. We line up on beaches. I went to the air show for years in Chicago. Look, it's a B-2. Woo! What's that for? Oh, bring about nuclear Armageddon.
It's a policy instrument, Rob.
I do think once that thing become a symbol of we crushed the rebellion, peace and order restored through the galaxy, people be like, ooh, look, and look. You're telling me you wouldn't be kind of that's really, look at that space station. Even by Star Wars standards, it's really, really big. It's impressive.
I mean, the one difference between us and the Empire is that at least we don't have, or we have the good sense not to call our bombers the Death Star.
Yeah.
Did you think it's the Death Star like a colloquial term in the Imperial Navy, or is that what the public knows it as? Because it's kind of difficult to sell yourselves as the good guys when you're rolling around with something called the Death Star, right?
I don't know, man. Our bomber names are bad, right?
B2 Spirit, B1 Lancer.
Are those the names that the official names, or are those what we call them though? Don't we call the B2 Spirit something else?
No, I don't think so.
I can't remember. Okay. Spirit is it. My bad.
Yeah.
I don't.
It's great. It's friendly.
I don't know. I feel like after you blow up, like the potential for human failure with any weapon system is pretty high. I feel like we have a pretty good record of not blowing people up during Fleet Week, but like maybe maybe the Death Star gunner guy's ex-girlfriend is on the planet down below. And he's like, you know what? Fuck this. I'm going to blow this planet up. I want rid of her once and for all. Like all it takes is one of those mistakes. You have a bad PR problem if you're the Empire. That's all I'm saying.
So you do, but planets get got in Star Wars. This is low key one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts about the EU is that they topple the Empire and the New Republic is just like losing planets and populations right and left. Like, oh, a new novel just came out and 2 more systems were obliterated. But wow, I think you've touched on something else, which is that most things in Star Wars are surprisingly crew intensive. And so you're saying they're like all it takes is one depressed dude up there, like those pilots that like crash their planes full of people, right? That's the theory that the MH370 didn't disappear, that the pilot decided to kill everyone. We know for a fact that happened with a small commuter plane in the Pyrenees a few years ago. But when we see the super laser fire, that's a huge crew. A lot of people have to be like pulling levers and like fight, like it like takes a lot of people to do this stuff. And if you look at like terminals, like crew stations in Star Wars, they're like children's busy boxes. Like the buttons are the size of dinner plates. Like there is no equivalent to like the WASD keyboard in Star Wars, where like from this one command panel, you can do all the stuff that a droid can do it if it jacks in, but you cannot sit there at your terminal and like do all the shit. You can't do it. Your technology looks a lot more like a microfiche reader in an old library. For some of our listeners, like they used to have, you'd pull up reams of old newspaper info using microfiche and like sliding through that. When in Andor, he has the guy running the footage to try to track like ship traffic following a murder. It looks like the dude is like screwing around with a microfiche record of like ship plots. And so everything, like nothing is shrunken down where like one workstation can easily do multiple roles. Everything requires like literally somebody. They got 2 big levers that they're manipulating.
It's like every Imperial technician shall be responsible for no more than 1 lever and 1 knob. Well, in the firing sequence.
So you're saying it's like the turn your keys sir situation, except for you have to have 50 people doing the turning the keys all in a very prescribed sequence.
Yeah, it's like
I'll
Crimson Tide like had a cast of hundreds.
Yeah. You said something a second ago that makes me think of the Memex, which is a old hypothetical electromechanical information retrieval device that's pre-computers. I don't think anybody actually ever built one, at least in the time that they would have been useful.
That was the one. That was the one thought up by a Bush, right?
By Vannevar Bush, I think.
Vannevar Bush, which was I forget where he is in the Bush hierarchy.
Oh, is he one of those Bushes?
Yes, he is. He is of those Bushes, actually.
But yeah, it's an electromechanical like information retrieval thing that had like prototypical hypertext and a whole bunch of stuff. It shows up a lot in spy fiction from the Cold War era, and it's like the idea is that you have this little screen that when you key in the right kind of chords, you get the information you're looking for. Like it's a way of accessing a large data store very quickly. You know, kind of like a computer, but with knobs and projectors and stuff.
So there's I want to revisit that in 1 second. I remember one of the things that because I hadn't fully realized how bonkers Star Wars was with like how labor intensive some of its stuff was. I remember there's a ride at, I think it's the Rise of the Resistance ride or something at Galaxy's Edge, where you're loaded in your little cart and we're here to rescue you. You've been caught as Imperial spies, and you're rescued, and you escape through the bowels of the Star Destroyer, and you see Kylo Ren on the command pit above you, and all space battles happening. But there's one part where you sort of like are dropped down to the gun deck in the Star Destroyer, and what they basically depict is like a 19th or 18th century warship gun deck. Like every single gun is being sort of like laid by hand by like crew, and they are feeding like huge artillery shells up through the hoist. But it's like World War II ammunition feeding mechanism. But in terms of like how they are sighting the guns, it is again like massively labor intensive. There is no central fire direction.
You see that in the opening battle of Revenge of the Sith as well, right? You see like giant like 3-man crews loading giant shells into these turbo lasers that are broadsiding each other.
Yeah, they're literally poking guns out of holes in the side of the spaceship.
Yeah,
to shoot at the other. I mean, there's force fields or whatever, but yeah, no, that's absolutely true. It's weirdly anachronistic all the way through when you think about it a little bit.
Because technology, like, especially with like battle stuff, technology has not been good for narrative tension, right? Like, it's just not.
Yes, cell phones
like the
ruin
Tom
stories.
Clancy of it all.
Yeah, it's like Vinny's got that rule on the Watchcast. We always have to evaluate, hey, with the presence of cell phones, have completely negated this entire plot line.
Yeah. Does the presence of like a long range self-guided radar directed missile make a universe more or less interesting? Makes it a lot less interesting, right? It's like how valuable is it to be like you're the greatest starfighter pilot anyone's ever seen? And it's like, great, this dude on the ground is going to push a button and a missile's going to come and get you from like 20 minutes away. So you can't have that happening. It's got to be a place where like the starfighter is your steed, and the battleship is not even like a World War II battleship. It is closer to like a old Age of Sail man of war, which is also why you get these like why you get such ridiculous size. The Empire increases firepower, but the technology doesn't scale. Like the Death Star is kind of their breakthrough with that, but like they just have to make ships bigger. So like the Star Destroyer, has a massive amount of firepower just by being a much bigger ship.
But also it has enormous, like, what's the crew on a Star Destroyer? It's like 20,000 people or something ridiculous.
Yeah. It makes sense because nothing is automated. Again, everyone's got their own, like, you get the one knob you work for to fire one of those turbo lasers. The Executor has like 100 turbo lasers, 100 ion cannons. You figure a crew of like, you're talking a lot of people there.
How do you manage food for a fleet? Because there's a lot of Star Destroyers too. There's hundreds of Star Destroyers, few of the big ones like the Executor.
Yeah, how they value the relative value of a Star Destroyer changes a lot. That is a thing they are very fast and loose with in Star Wars. I tend to like the notion that the Imperial 2 class Star Destroyer is like their Nimitz. There aren't that many of them. They're super important when they show up. But Star Wars, especially like Rebels, loves blowing them the fuck up. And so Star Wars ends up in a place where they're a little bit disposable. And that reaches its nadir with Rise of Skywalker, where like here's 1 million Star Destroyers.
Sorry, you're talking like the classic Imperial class?
Yeah.
Like the wedge?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those to me, like when I was a kid, those felt like the Nimitz, right? And those felt like an Enterprise class nuclear American aircraft carrier. And then they made the big one, which we don't have a parallel for, really, I guess. I mean, maybe we do now. I don't pay attention to that stuff as much anymore. Was that the only one?
The super. I always knew that as the Super Star Destroyer.
So the Executor is the only one that we see in the movies. However, so in the expanding universe, I think they said there were like a number of them. There's like Lusankya. There was the one that Warlord Zinj had. I can't remember the name of that one. But the idea was there were a bunch of these things, that they're sort of the flagships of the Empire's various far-flung fleets. You also see one at the start of kind of a goofy one at the start of Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight, where the sort of rogue Dark Jedi are rocking sort of their own special like super Star Destroyer. But that's all, EU stuff. As far as I can tell, like the Super Star Destroyer is the like Vader's Executor is the one and only.
There was one in X-Wing, one of the X-Wing games too, I think, if I remember right, that you had to fight. That was, and if there's one in an X-Wing game, there's absolutely one in like Rebel Assault or one of those CD-ROM games.
Yes.
Yeah, but was it just the one? Maybe it was just the Executor though.
I don't think so, because I think eventually they had you blow it up in that game.
Oh, you do blow it up?
Yeah, I think the whole point of having it there was so you could blow it up, if I had to guess.
Although X-Wing Alliance ends at Endor, so maybe it was the Executor. But
that's the one that I never finished. I was into first person shooters by then. That game was really hard. Yeah.
I can't remember if I finished Alliance either. Now you're taking me back to the 90s when I remember thinking like, man, can you imagine 20 years from now, when we have the technology, we'll be able to recreate the Battle of Endor with perfect fidelity and the exact same number of ships and everything, right? And it'll be massively multiplayer and everybody will be in there, not knowing that by the time we had that technology, we would lack the will to build such a thing.
Well, look, there's a really good mod project for X-Wing Alliance that upreses everything and makes it all 3D and VR and the whole deal.
Yeah,
so
it's true, but the problem is we don't even have the beautiful pipeline of the ecosystem of joysticks. The glorious sculpted wingman joystick is sort of lost to time. Its secrets are its secrets are lost with it. Now you have to buy some sort of sci-tech thing on the aftermarket and see what you can get. But so like everything in Star Wars like intent like crew power intensive. This is that droids save labor by basically being like, yes, magical assistants who can do specific tasks and spare you the need of having compute power or tons of hands touching a thing. There's one thing. So you mentioned the Memex, and I wanted to ask you, in Rogue One, when they access the big archive with the secret plans, it's that whole like data retrieval, like they're pulling cassettes, like a huge vault.
I looked at them as like those old school hard drives. Like they looked like 70s era hard drives, like the ones that held like 4 megabytes and were 30 pounds, big squares. Yeah.
Yeah. And they got a whole machine like maneuvering these things around. And that's how and I remember I'd seen that one other place. Does anyone remember the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Eraser?
Oh yeah. It's the CIA data retrieval or something, right? Or some weapons lab he has to do.
They have to break into a a facility that basically does the same thing with like CD-ROMs. And there's a whole like thing with its little like octopus arms going whir, whir, and grabbing the little drives. And they're all like the little caddies, and that's important. I'm curious, did anything like that exist? Like, was that a data storage architecture and approach that was adopted?
Yeah. So in the 90s, and honestly, there's a place for that with like big CD caddy, like a big 100-disc Sony CD carousel player. But the robot arm loading and unloading stuff absolutely existed. My first job out of college, I was in charge of maintaining a Colorado, I think 2 gig or 10 gig tape backup system that was able to back up our entire server infrastructure across a 10 megabit network. And it had a stack of like 2 stacks of 20 tapes, and you'd load up the tapes in slots. And there were 2 tape players at the bottom of each of those towers, tape recorders at the bottom of each of those towers. And the little robot arm would go up and grab the tape out of the slot and then lower it down and jam it into the receiver. And then when the backup was finished running for that night, it would pull the tape and go back up and put it back in its slot and do that same thing for every machine in the array. But so this was just like that thing was 4 feet tall, 5 feet tall, and weighed 100 pounds. This is the institutional infrastructure building version of that.
Yeah. So that thing it didn't have to store the Death Star plans.
We didn't have the Death Star plans, sadly. At one point, maybe Shogo was on there because I brought in a copy, and somebody I don't want to.
Monolith.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about Shogo today. It's too real.
Also, I think it's one of their lesser games, but I know some people really love it.
Look, it had a real moment. It was a weird time. It was early first-person shooter. Scale changed. They just made the levels big or small. That was really cool. It was no Nulf, right?
No. Yeah. There's something ironic to an appreciation of Shogo, I find.
But I do love the notion that they have that Star Wars sort of again implies with the existence of those machines. Same way compute is really limited. Data storage sucks. Like the data cards. We condensed this book from clumsy books down to a half dozen data cards. That like everything the same way, like transmitting audiovisual information across space, massively intensive. Basic things like recording stuff on some sort of physical medium, they can't do it very easily. It requires massive facilities to have like a significant amount of data stored in one location.
Maybe their literacy problems mean that they're bad at math. Imagine how hard math would be if you didn't have paper. right? You learn like, so if they're bad at math, they're probably bad at compression. They're definitely bad at encryption. So like there's a follow on. This is all just a base level thing of them not figuring out how to make paper out of trees or papyrus, and not being able to. Maybe there's no slate or chalk in Star Wars.
Well, part of it also is it's like if around the time the abacus shows up, the abacus can like think and be your friend. They're very fuzzy about one droid. Like droids are not technology that's developed as far as we can tell. There's no like, this is the droids started to exist and this is how the universe has unfolded since then. Droids are just there in Star Wars, and they kind of exist apart from sentient, like physical beings, from biological beings.
It's true.
But what's weird is they have like specific missions, and there are droid manufacturers out there. There are like droid series that are kind of known. They're marketed. But in terms of like the thing I've kind of set for myself there is it's a bit in BattleTech, the universe that like gave us Mech Warrior. There's this concept of like lost tech, right? That there are automated factories that can produce things that we no longer know how to make. Which, by the way, if a bunch of bad shit happened in our world, we would end up in a similar situation where it's like, here's a massive semiconductor foundry. How does it work? No fucking clue. How can we rebuild it? Can't.
I started to ask at the top of this podcast when we were talking about recorded information and literacy and stuff, if this is some kind of an H.G. Wells situation of society that has forgotten how most of this stuff works.
Well, it's like Damascus Steel. We have that. We have things that people don't know how to make anymore that we used to know how to make, right? Maybe Damascus Steel is a bad example.
It's a flawed example because all the special steel is just that there were special mineral deposits in that locality.
Oh, okay.
That
I have heard
when you
that,
mixed it in, made the blade stronger. So they just like not knowing why or how they made better alloys. And that was why. So Damascus was one location. There's one region in Germany that had like a reputation for like extremely high quality blades. Once those deposits ran out, turns out their artisans were better.
Yeah,
good to know. But yeah, I mean, the idea is solid. Like, what if the guy who was, I mean, what if one started a droid foundry, he's really good at that, and then his kid didn't want to do that and wanted to go have a space ice cream stand, and the droid foundry shut down, and those droids are the good. Like, there's no sense of upgrades in the droid world.
What if all the droid foundries are run by droids? Maybe droids are the only ones who know how to make droids at this point.
Wow.
This is okay. So Star Wars is super hand wavy about this stuff, because if you think about the droid thing too far, you end up down some, like, for one, there's the whole like, so they basically got slaves, right? Yeah, but they're like cute little droid robots, so it's like fine, they like it. Like, there's the droid's place in the society is kind of like can be bleak if you think about it, and so we just kind of choose not to, except some Star Wars authors do. So we get many glorious things happen in the novel by Dave Wolverton, The Courtship of Princess Leia. But there's a point where Han, basically the rich kid, shows up and he's like going to steal Han's girl, being Princess Leia. And Han is like, I got to show something. I got to show that I really care. I really get it. I really understand her. I got to make a big grand gesture. And so he has 3PO compose a theme song for Han Solo called What a Man, Han Solo.
Wait, what?
And in the sequence where his whole plan is like basically a press conference, a diplomatic like press conference, he's like hit at 3PO, and 3PO, having sort of the ability to produce lots of different sounds. We hear him do like a radio drama for the Ewoks. He can do stuff like this. He just plays this big like show tune, What a Man, Han Solo. And in this sequence, what is described is everyone's like, what the fuck just happened? What is happening here? There's a lot of moments like that in Courtship of Princess Leia, but he also is at pains to describe the droids working for the broadcast crews nearby lose their shit. They love it because like it's a huge moment in droids' rights. There's droids' rights advocates in the Courtship of Princess Leia that they refer to that like, yeah, why shouldn't a droid be allowed to interrupt this proceeding and like sing a little ditty for his buddy? And so like immediately you have like broadcast droids being like, 3PO, you're a hero to all of us. And everyone's like, get that droid out of here. But you have implied in this universe, people are like, well, droids are people, so we should like give them that legal status. And Andor sort of closes in on that too, right? It's, you have Andor telling his droid, Andor's like adoptive mother tells their droid, hey, the cops can't mess with you that way. The cops can't just like turn you off. That's not allowed. They're not authorized to do that. And so like droids do have like some limited legal status in Star Wars and are not merely like machines.
But do they have status as other people's property, or do they have status like the cop can't reach into my car and turn the car off if I don't allow that, right? Is it the same situation, or is this like the droid has the right, or do I have the right because I own the droid?
You could be right, but it certainly feels like in that scene in Andor,
yeah,
what she is reassuring the droid is that, hey man, you got rights.
Yeah, That's when they come to her house to beat the door down to find him, right?
Yeah.
I feel like the droid, like okay, some of the droids definitely have rights in the form of plot armor, right? So like your C-3POs and R2-D2s and B2 Emos and all those. But then are there self-owned droids? Are there droids that don't have an owner? Because ostensibly Princess Leia owns C-3PO and Luke or Anakin own R2-D2. Ahsoka never gets a droid in the Clone Wars.
So the assassin droids are portrayed as, sorry, not all of them. There's the ones, but like you see IG-88 as one of the bounty hunters.
Of course.
Oh, right. Yeah. And Forloom.
Yeah. They aren't working for other people. It's not like IG-88 is leased to go do bounty hunter shit. Like IG-88 is in it for the love of the game.
He just likes murdering humans or organics, I think, he's an aficionado.
And when you see the other IG series in The Mandalorian, he follows robot logic. He's like, it's the Taika Waititi droid. Like, sorry, man, like this is my target. I'm here to kill this thing. But he isn't doing it. I don't think it's implied that he's doing it for someone else. Like he's taking money.
Well, he's taking the bounty for someone else, but he's not doing the bounty hunting in the first place for someone else. It's not like he's a proxy for some organic somewhere, biological. Yeah, I mean, look, arguably you could say the entire Star Wars trilogy should have been the R2-D2 saga and not the Skywalker saga, because he's really the hero of the whole thing. Until J.J. Abrams got a hold of it, he was the hero of the whole thing.
Yeah, but also a chaotic element. Like there's like he's our hero, yes, but there is a little bit of almost like a Iago from Othello quality to this. Like, why aren't you just telling people this shit? Boo, 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 boo. Like just nothing, just giving people zilch. Just quietly, and Clone Wars leans all the way into it. Like R2 is just like murking droids right and left. And
he murders
people,
humans.
Really.
He has a huge kill count. Like R2-D2's killed a lot of people.
Massive. They're like venting people into space. So like,
yeah,
the droid. Yeah. So there's no first law of robotics type stuff. None of this crap to put guardrails on them. Like there are droids that like are sort of, it's in their nature to kill. And then there's droids who sort of change their nature, like R2, to be like, easiest solution here would just be to get these guys, and he'll do it. But the thing that is missing in all this is there's like no one's like, I've made a new droid. Here's a new droid line. There are places you buy new droids. New droid models come out. They have reputations. There are brands. But there is no implication that like there is a capitalistic society in Star Wars that is creating droids, and there's like droid designers and they're building like these things. Do feel like there is an infrastructure that creates droids that do these jobs in Star Wars that runs independently and without input from the biologicals in that universe.
And you hit on something else too, which there doesn't seem to be a lot of consumerism in Star Wars. Like everything gets reused. When something gets broken, you fix it. You don't chuck it and get the new one. All the way down to like what's her name's character on The Mandalorian, who lives in one of those Tatooine docking
the
bays.
Sedaris character.
Yeah, Sedaris' character.
Mechanic. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's just basically buying garbage from people and then turning it into stuff that she can sell to people who come through.
Yeah, prior to Attack of the Clones, when you see like a sports bar and a kind of red light district, like it was impossible for me to imagine even any form of like mass popular media in this universe, let alone like an advertising consumer driven economy, you know, like it just like those concepts. And I can't even qualify that. I can't give like a rational reason for that. I just could not see those things even existing in this universe. Even when we see signs of them, I'm like, no, that doesn't belong here.
Well, I think a lot of that is in the movies. Most of the movies take place in weird outskirts because that's where at least the first movies, because that's where the rebels are hiding. In the cartoons, you see a lot more of like the real, you know, the main part of the civilization, to the point that like there's screens every, you know, it's full on cyber dystopia in Coruscant, and you see like screens pop up with like wanted posters and current events and, you know, all the happenings of the day, kind of.
There's a lot there. God, I love this stuff. Like literally, this is why I'm a menace as the host of AMCA, because I will talk about this stuff all night. So there's a couple things. One is that to the point of consumerism in Star Wars. One, I think there's a lot of implications that by and large, Star Wars operates almost as like feudal economies. That like resources are stripped from planets and sent to like a few cosmopolitan like metropoles that exist in the galaxy. But by and large, like if you're not in that territory, then it is subsistence, agriculture, strip mining. That's what's out there for you. I think related to that is, are you familiar with this argument that like the modern cargo container is basically like the key to modern commerce?
Yeah. The Alexis Madrigal did a podcast series about this like 10 years ago now. That's fabulous if people want to listen to it.
And there's something to that. Like if you look at, if you think about like what a tramp freighter looked like in the 1920s or something, you've seen these things, right? Old Bogart movies and such. The hold has a hatch in the deck of the ship, and people are lowering whatever random shit, as the cargo that week. It's being lowered into the hull, and you have stevedores sort of sorting it and like securing it, but it's all very grab bag. It's not standardized at all. Star Wars clearly operates that way. The only thing we see close to a cargo container ship is in Rebels. There is a massive Imperial container ship that is like, this is where they meet AP5. He's a big like logistics droid, but they fly big cargo container haulers around. And this is sort of an innovation that the Empire is bringing to the galaxy, which dovetails what we see in Andor, which is when, what are they doing in Aldhani? They're building a military fulfillment center. It's sort of Amazon militant is
like a distribution center for, yeah.
So they don't have the capacity like to move goods from one place to another. You're kind of hiring random freighters and merchants to sort of bring good. It's very like Age of Sail, Age of Discovery type stuff of like there's barely big shipping firms. There's just a lot of like independent operators. There's a lot of different like ship types, and maybe goods are brought to your planet, maybe they're not, but there is no like networked global trade infrastructure, which, obviously would also be harder because information doesn't travel well, which is also why, it both works for and against the Empire in that their ability to propagandize is fairly limited. That the Jedi sort of stick their head in the lion's mouth in Clone Wars because Palpatine has what the only media like center there is in the galaxies on Coruscant, and he can sort of broadcast to those people. But, you get outside Coruscant, people have a really murky idea of what's happening in the galaxy.
Well, I mean, it works like the Age of Sail, where you drop missives in the hold of a ship going the direction you want to send them, and then the news gets there when the ship gets there, right? Theoretically.
And I think it's what makes, like in Skeleton Crew, we just saw what's kind of weird about that planet is that it does have a sort of 20th century consumer culture. It has something akin to a local mass media that sort of everyone is plugged into.
Well, and they have fungible currency that's easily transmissible, and a lot of it seems.
Right. And it's one of the things that's unsettling because if you know Star Wars, it's like, these things don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Star Wars suburbs, which we've never seen before. Look, I have other questions about Skeleton Crew. I think we're getting close to time, but the money situation between the stuff that you see in Clone Wars with the moons, which is wild. Like the fact that they made a children's cartoon about interest rates and war bond profiteering is incredible to me. And it's not just one episode; it's like 3 or 4, I think, too. Then the fact that the Empire's payroll operates in cash, which was what we learned in Andor and the Aldhani arc, followed by the thing that just happened in Skeleton Crew, which is that I guess spoiler alert, because this is relatively new. They find an incredible amount of money by Star Wars standards in this planet at the end of Skeleton Crew that if it gets out will literally destabilize the entire galactic economy, it seems like. Like, I don't know.
Certainly nobody in Star Wars is bright enough to know that that's what's going to happen.
Like, you mean nobody in no characters in Star Wars or no people working on Star Wars currently?
Theory exists in Star Wars.
Oh yeah. There's no central economy for. Well,
it's a big hut being like, ho, 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 ho. Yeah. And just like getting pissed off because like you're just dumping piles of ducats on someone's desk. And like, sorry, man, that's just not enough.
When does that show take place? Like just in the larger timeline?
Sometime post Endor.
Okay. It's just post Endor. I think it's pre-Mandalorian post Endor or early Mandalorian post Endor. That show's worth watching. I enjoyed the show's great. Highly recommended.
I dig it. So there's a few things that are interesting with the currency. So in the Clone Wars, this kind of blew our minds when we encountered it. They eventually go to the banking clans like Space Switzerland planet, right? And all their vaults and shit have massive, like they are built like huge circuits. It's like going inside, it's like Reboot where you're like inside the computer. And the implication that like we started to pick up from that was the banking clan is operating effectively a crypto. Like that their operations are effectively like functioning as sort of a crypto enterprise. That they have like massive ledgers that they are keeping track of on this planet, but it's Star Wars, so you basically need a planet's worth of computing to maintain these ledgers and like conduct these transactions. But crucially, if this is the sort of currency that backs the Republic, they go to the banking clan when they need to raise funds. This cryptocurrency that they appear to be running is something that, like, when we meet Watto, he refuses it. He doesn't want Republic credits. Like, outside of the Republic, that shit has no value. He's not going to take a sort of a marker from Qui-Gon. He needs something more real than the money the Republic uses. The Empire uses a hard currency, but we kind of get in Skeleton Crew is by the time Endor rolls around, that currency is so debased that everyone's like, remember the good old days when we had like real money from the Republic? And the leftover Republic species is now like the highest value currency in the galaxy, much more so than the Imperial credits and whatever the hell the New Republic is issuing. And then you get to the planet in Skeleton Crew, and once again, there's some evidence that they're basically doing something that amounts to crypto. That they're plating, that they're creating these chits, but the chits have some sort of like electronic data component on them. And then they're plating it to look like a metal currency.
Okay, there's a lot here. For the record, the Clone Wars episodes all predate crypto being a normal thing the thing that normal people know about, right?
Yes, they do.
By a pretty substantial margin. Because like the earliest I heard about crypto was like 2010, I think. And like normal people didn't hear about it for 5 years.
But when does the paper come out that posits that it could be a currency?
Oh, that was late 2009, I think. The original Bitcoin paper.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go fact check here. Of course, the US doesn't have it listed.
Yeah, I'm trying to find 2008.
So this was post Clone Wars then.
Yeah, you're right.
Because that was like season 4. It was late in the original run.
No, wait, hang on. The Clone Wars starts airing in 2008.
Yeah, but nobody, but like literally the first time somebody said that I was covering technology at the time.
Except the show was made out of Silicon Valley.
Well, it's made out of Marin.
And also like George, there's people on that team, like,
yeah,
they're clever people.
Wow. So, okay. So So the cycle is Watto doesn't like the crypto-backed Republic currency, so he's on the gold standard with the Hutts.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Republic collapses. The Empire makes their own fake funny money, which is good for like 20 years, but is probably massively inflationary by the end because they have to print a shitload of money to buy food, or at least to pay the people that they're stealing food from to feed their enormous army for the spaceships that have 20,000 people a pop on them.
Yep.
And then the Empire collapses and that money becomes even more valueless somehow. Like we're talking Nigeria printing more new money every day kind of money is a situation. So then the old currency is good. And then it seems like the New Republic currency is maybe garbage in the Skeleton Crew timeline.
Yep.
So
now everyone's looking back at the Republic currency that was being issued and like, man, if only we get our hands on that.
So Star Wars is all about the importance of managing a centralized economy.
That would be consistent with Lucas's politics.
He did. He did kind of look at like, how are we going to tell the origin story of the Empire? Well,
let me tell you.
Can I bring up one more topic very quickly before we go?
Yeah.
This is one of the things in my older age, I find the most fascinating in Star Wars. We touched on this a little bit earlier. Can we just talk about Anakin and his whole deal?
Well, that kind of narrows it down.
Well, okay, his physical existence, let's say, post burning to a crisp.
Oh, sorry, I thought you meant Anakin. Like it was like you mean Vader?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you meant the spontaneous generation of Anakin Skywalker.
No,
Holy Birth.
I thought you were talking about why is he so good at fixing droids?
I mean, say whatever else you will about the prequels, but like those are the things that gave me the continuity of narrative to think of Vader as Anakin, right? Like I never really thought about what was Anakin Skywalker other than a name you hear once or twice in the entire trilogy until the prequels came along. But like, I mean, I'm fascinated by his deal thematically because like to fall from such a height, to have literally the best space wizard powers in history and end up like that is, like certainly very tragic from a thematic standpoint, but also just like the mechanics of taking what is left of him and cramming him in that suit and making him continue to live. Like this is just kind of a conversation starter. I'm not sure I have a question here.
So I think there's a couple of things. First is he being kept alive by technology purely?
I don't know.
Or is there a Sith thing happening that's inherent to him being I don't want to dip too much into EU or like fan theories or whatever, although this is a good chance to rep the Matthew Stover novelization of Revenge of the Sith. Rob, I assume you've read that. I have not, actually.
You have not?
No.
Okay, you should really read that. You should do that for a podcast. You guys should read that book at some point and do a podcast
eventually
on
burn
it.
through all the content we want to cover, and we'll be dipping into the novelizations for sure. But yeah,
Fair.
I've heard there's some things that are in there that are like, well, like for instance, we are aware that in the novelization of Attack of the Clones, Dooku basically gives sort of like a Bernie Sanders speech almost, right? Where he's like, the Republic serves the oligarchs who are in charge of it. I'm telling you right now, a Sith is running the entire thing. And so it's like, whoa, Dooku's cooking. Hold on, Obi-Wan, hear him out.
Yeah, I mean, the Stover book expands massively on Anakin's turn and why he was so strung out and mistrustful by the end that he would actually take the actions he did. But it also, it gets into, we touched on this earlier, how long was he lying there on the table as they bolted things onto him to make him continue to live. I want to say the book implies it's like a matter of days, that surgical process is days long, but I can't quite remember.
Well, so I watched, this was one of the other things I watched because I wanted to remember it because I knew we were going to talk about it. When Palpatine gets to Anakin on Mustafar and he's laying there and he's pulled himself up way far enough from the lava that he's no longer like getting singed further, but it's bad. The first thing Palpatine does is kneels down next to him and does like some hand wavy stuff over his head that I assumed, I read in this viewing as that's some weird Sith shit right there. Yeah. Like he's doing some dark magic, but also he's pretty full of rage, right? He's an angry guy. And we all know anger, it's going to keep him going.
Like there's so much I kind of love like, and I'll need to read more stories. Like I love the notion. I often think about like the parts of the facade of the lies that Anakin's told, like as they begin to crack, right? Like when you realize your son is alive and out there. And so the whole like, oh, sorry, Padme died and we lost the kids. the realization that like that sort of cornerstone of him becoming Darth Vader, that was bullshit. And sort of the slow, like, well, wait, what else has been bullshit? The same way, like, you know, there's the suit keeps him alive, but does it also? Palpatine builds the suit, and nothing Palpatine gives anyone is sort of untainted, right? Everything is double-edged. So the suit is at once his life support system, but is it a good one? Does it keep him like, does he have to live in extreme pain, or is it just like, is that a feature, not a bug? Because the other thing, that the reason Palpatine needed Anakin in the first place was like Anakin has greater potential as a Jedi, has greater force potential than Palpatine. Palpatine recognizes early that this guy is a threat, maybe the only threat he has to worry about. And so, you know, one, it's a great coup to sort of make him your henchman, but also there is that underlying like fear of what this guy could do. In some ways, it works out quite nicely for Palpatine that Obi-Wan, you know, largely mutilates this guy and leaves him badly wounded. But you wonder how much of that could be recovered from. But does Palpatine even want that? Does Palpatine want that suit to basically be like an iron lung that like caps what he is capable of doing? That, you know, the extent of his force power is kind of going to be as like sort of a lurching, you know, golem out there in the out there in the universe, and not like a Jedi, and not really even like a Sith.
There's some really great metaphorical language in that novelization. Like there's an amazing line at the end of the book when he emerges in the suit that describes the suit as, if I remember, it describes it as a magnificent jewel box to display the greatest treasure of the Sith. So like,
that's a great line.
Yeah, it is. And it's like, and it is, you know, it's like, as much as it is a life support system, it's also a cage and a display case, you know, and it's a limiting factor as much as a.
Yeah, Rob, I think you hit on the thing that I always wondered, is that whether Palpatine was upset that his best weapon got limited by this outing to Mustafar, or if he's relieved that he doesn't have to do, like, that he's diminished as a result of his injuries and thus isn't a real threat anymore.
Yeah, I think certainly, but like by the last scene, he seems kind of pleased, right? He's in that Palpatine, like sort of pervy vibe of like
full fraud. Yeah.
Yeah. And so like, I do think he has some warmth and like, in a weird, like fucked up way, like some tenderness toward Anakin, but also he loves seeing him like fall and get twisted and also become, you know, the problem the Sith have is sort of the rule of two means eventually you're going to have to watch your back. And I think with Anakin, he's got the closest thing he's ever going to have to like, well, I actually don't have to watch my back. Like, this guy is completely dependent, and not just like physically, but also just like psychologically, that he doesn't have it in him to imagine a rebellion.
Like the book touches on that too, that like Anakin at once despises Palpatine, but also realizes he's the only thing that he has left.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a real abusive relationship situation there. But bundled up with a real nice chunk of, hey, weirdness about disability and prosthetics all in one delightful little Darth Vader shaped bundle. I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. Rob, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming by.
Oh, no problem. Actually, there's one last thought I did have.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's worth noting the Empire's continually obsessed with reproducing Sith force powers through technology, which is another kind of, interesting.
How so?
So to a degree, like the Death Star itself is sort of a perversion of the lightsaber.
Sure.
And we sort of, again, in Rebels, we see them activating the Sith built something similar. Darth Maul almost activates it at the end of Sith season 2, where he turns on this big Sith machine that looks like it's about to zap distant planets. And then Vader shows up and Ezra Bridger stop the whole thing. But like, the Sith build stuff like this. Also in Rebels, there's a thing you sort of see where, we just got to this. The spoiler for people at this point in it, but we're not current with this episode. One of the characters on Rebels builds this device that's like sort of an anti-Mandalorian super weapon.
Oh.
And it functions kind of like a neutron bomb, but in its appearance, it's like Sith lightning. It zaps people and just like renders them to dust. And it 100%, like, in terms of vibe, the way it functions, completely like a Sith technology. And so I think there's a thing you see running through a lot of this, where a lot of the inspiration for the Empire's technical development is often like, how do you create some sort of technical solution to things that a Sith like Palpatine would just know how to do? Because his big problem is how, like, he can't be everywhere. How do you rule the galaxy without sharing or dividing your power? Well, if you can't be everywhere, you try to give some semblance of your special abilities to your armed forces. And so, like, the Empire's technological direction is in some ways informed by like force myth, force powers.
That makes a ton of sense. I never thought about it that way. That's fascinating. Well, Rob, where can people find you if they want to get more Zacny in their life?
Oh gosh. So yeah, I'm on Blue Sky, but I'm not as on social media as much. Probably the place I'm hanging out most is Remap Radio, remapradio.com. You can also listen to me talk about Formula One at Shift F1. And then, I'm on A More Civilized Age. I do too many things. I have the problem of people in our demographic where you get an interest and it's like, hey, this could be a podcast. And that's the only way you maintain adult friendships.
It turns out if you want to talk to other adults that have the same interests as you, the best way to do it is to start a podcast. Who knew?
Yep.
Rob, you'll appreciate this. I heard on a different podcast a definition of techno-feudalism yesterday that I don't know that I could get this entirely right. That people like us, people that make content, are effectively the farmers in the techno-feudal system, and the landowners are the people that own the digital cloud platforms, and they seek rents from the farmers who are tilling the digital fields and dispersing their content to the masses who are consuming it.
And then the kings are the venture capitalists that funded the platforms in the first place.
Basically, yes.
Oh, that's grim.
There's a lot to that. They haven't fully enclosed podcasts, fortunately. But like, if you look at, if somebody wanted to put the screws to you on Patreon, we've gotten tastes of that. But like, it could be done, right? You make things as bad as possible before you would risk the platform supremacy. So there's always money in the banana stand, I think, when it comes to once you have that sort of market power, you can just sort of adjust prices as you sort of, I'm sure we all get those emails, like start every year, price adjustment from the service you have almost no choice but to use.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot lately because of the newsletter I started, and there's always the tipping point. The question is, how far do the platforms go? Like, how much annoyance am I willing to put up with to avoid having to set up a ghost and connect it to a Stripe account and do all the pain in the ass that involves, and then figure out how to reconnect it into the Discord, all the different things.
I'll tell you this, that is not the pain in the ass.
Okay.
Straight up. So Stripe concerns me because when I was looking into this, like, Stripe is kind of a monopoly. And the people behind Stripe are not like always like not the best people. But in terms of being able to set that stuff up, Stripe is pretty straightforward. It's pretty functional. So one of the things I learned when Waypoint went down, it was time to sort of start a business, was a lot of this is shockingly easy to stand up. And like, if you really look at what Patreon does, the reason like a lot of my other businesses remain on Patreon is that, well, that's where your audience is. And you're going to like, how do you move them over off Patreon? That's good. How do you have new audiences discover you?
Yeah.
How do you solve that problem? So a lot of us are kind of wedded to the platform in that way. But from the standpoint of like, what makes it all go? Someone doing like transaction, like security and handling that is not the hard part. And to an extent, like what Patreon does is like, they are a Stripe account that distributes funds to various creators, but getting that Stripe account is shockingly easy. It's all the other stuff that's kind of hard to recreate.
Okay. Good to know. Well, thanks for coming by. We will hope to have you back sometime soon to talk about other stuff too, Rob. It's been a blast.
Absolutely. I'm sure at some point I will have some sort of mishap with various attempts to make my home smarter, or like finally solve my various media library conundrums with some sort of like master solution, one server to bind them, and then it'll go bad. And then I'll be like, could we do an episode where basically you guys, how's this for an episode? I get on a conference call with you and tell you what I'm seeing on this log.
Sure.
And you can tell me what to do next.
Absolutely. Live troubleshoot Rob's server logs 100%. I'm in. Well, that was fun.
Yeah, not at all. Star Wars, huh?
Yeah.
It's when I was a kid watching Star Wars on CBS, I don't think I imagined that I would be talking about Star Wars as an adult 40 years later, but here we are, and I'm happy to do that.
I don't think many people predicted many things about the way pop culture has gone in the intervening decades, but
you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But thanks again to Rob for coming by, and this is fun. If you like this, please let us know. We'll do something. We'll do more like it. There is other stuff in the realm, but if you don't like it, don't worry. We're not going to do this very often. We wanted to get Rob on the podcast for a long time.
Yes. Actually, let me ask you, as a listener of their podcast.
Yes.
No offense to them. This is more about the length of the Clone Wars, but I have no intention of watching the Clone Wars. I know people love it. I just don't have the time.
Oh, okay. So there's two things. If you want to try out their podcast,
yes,
they did an arc on Andor when the first episodes dropped in 2022.
That's why I asked him about maybe doing the Stover novelization, but also I wanted to ask you, because I knew they did some shorter interludes about things that are not the Clone Wars.
Yeah, so they do a lot of that. Actually, they just did a patron episode about Skeleton Crew. They did, I think, patron episodes about Obi-Wan. They've done some other episodes in the main line here and there. They did a Thrawn episode arc, the 3 Thrawn novels over a few weeks ago, just a bit ago, actually. They also did at the end of, so they're watching stuff in the release order for the podcast, I think. So they started with the Clone Wars movie, and then they watched Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and watched the first 5 or 6 seasons. I think it's 6 seasons of Clone Wars. And then the Lucasfilm animation people went off and made Rebels and a bunch of other stuff. And then when Disney bought them, they came back and did a 7th season of the Clone Wars. So they haven't watched that last season of the Clone Wars. At the end of their Clone Wars run, they made a cut list of, here are the important episodes of Clone Wars to watch to get the vibe of the whole thing. Because just to be clear, there's a lot of Clone Wars and the quality's all over the place. Some of the episodes are really among the best things that have been done in Star Wars. And there's a lot of real garbage tier episodes. There's an arc in season 5 that I think they lost 70% of the audience on or something. It's an R2-D2 arc. Sadly, it bums me out. Anyway, the point is, start with Andor. If you enjoy what they're talking about, if you enjoy their approach, because it's Austin Walker of Waypoint and Giant Bomb and a bunch of other stuff, Friends at the Table, Natalie Watson, who you know from Remap or from Waypoint as well, and Ali Alcompour. And they have deep commentary about the social kind of aspects of Star Wars. That's really fascinating. But the Andor stuff is I think where I started. That's where I jumped in.
I am going to rewatch season 1 in prep for season 2, so that sounds like a good time to listen to that podcast as well. But to clarify what you just said, they have done episodes on the prequels.
They've done episodes on each of the prequels.
Okay, I have to listen to those.
It's interesting because I kind of want them to. The one thing for me, having jumped in with Andor and then gone back and watched all the all the Clone Wars cartoons or after that, I think the movies really benefit from the character development that you get over a 200 episode TV show. That's
always been the consensus for sure.
Yeah, you definitely I like those movies more now than I did before, and that's not to excuse their failures because they're bad movies, but they went back in and retconned a bunch of character motivations that are not there in George Lucas's original vision, and it makes it a much more interesting endeavor. Anyway. Thanks everybody for coming along with us on this, and please let us know what you think about the show. As always, Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod is listener supported.
It's true. It is.
Yeah. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/techpod. My understanding is that they're the feudal lords in the metaphor.
Yes. The rent seekers, the landowners.
Yeah. I think our percentage is better than it was for the feudal, for the feudal farmers, but
probably.
But anyway, yeah, please go to patreon.com/techpod and sign up if you'd like to help support the show. You also get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord, which is full of nerds just like you who are into all sorts of topics, including we have a really long Star Wars thread, among other things. We also talk about if you want help setting up servers, the questions Rob has about servers probably answered in our server forums. So please check that out. And
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt real quick?
Yes.
Thanks to Martin on the Discord.
Shout outs to Martin
for tipping me off to the new thing this is just a little thing. I'm probably not going to go out and get one tomorrow, but maybe someday. He tipped me off to a little USB GPS receiver.
Oh, wow.
That you can hook up and turn into a little NTP server that runs in your house, an NTP network time protocol.
Oh, that's cool.
So this thing keeps perfect, accurate time with GPS satellites by pinging the satellites. So even without an internet connection, even if the internet goes down, even if you move out into the woods and free yourself and get off the grid, you can keep perfect time with this little USB dongle.
That reminds me that we should do a GPS episode.
Sure.
Because, it works because there's a bunch of atomic clocks in orbit around the Earth. Mm-hmm. And B, that is extraordinarily cool. So now as long as you have electricity, you know what time it is, assuming the satellites haven't fallen.
Of course, the person he linked to, or the person I think that made this project, keeps theirs in a little mason jar.
That's perfect.
outside their windowsill because it gets better GPS signal outside. So they bought a USB ribbon cable, which I didn't know existed, and ran it through the window. And anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
So stuff like that and more on the Discord. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive episode where we talk about projects and other things that are going on. Sometimes it's stuff that's too small for the regular episode. Again, it's patreon.com/techpod. And we appreciate everybody who supports the show, but especially our executive producer tier patrons, including Jason Lee, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett, Bunny Crimes enthusiastically recommends next.content.town. Thanks, Bunny Crimes. Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers of the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Thank you also so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And I guess that'll do it for us this week.
It will.
We will be back next week with another episode of the Tech Pod. If you were in Star Wars, you couldn't even print out this podcast.
Think about it.
If you cared about the environment, think about it, man.